Throwback Thursday, KTM 950 SUPR MOTO Road Test. From the April 2006 issue of Cycle World. Everyone keeps asking about the seat. I say it's designed for just what is intended, a nice 40-mile ride, the last 27 of which is spent in a high-speed chase. Hold on. Phone's ringing. No. Of course I don't. It's not like we're a bunch of stupid apes, you know. Look, it's called literary license. Yes. Okay. I understand, and yes, I like my paycheck. Sure. You too. That was legal. They want it to be clear that what I was saying is that this was a high-speed and chase naturally held on a closed course, and that only the highest, most trained riders were used during the chase, and that in no way were the police involved. Or was that most highly trained? First off, this is proof that they are monitoring my computer, and second, that they might even be reading my very thoughts. From now on, I am going to wrap my head in aluminum foil before riding the KTM 950 Supermoto. But there isn't enough tin foil in the universe to shield the mental energy this bike provokes. Take associate editor Mark Cernicki, who's worn his share of aluminum hats and is often speechless. The guttural noises and matte hand gestures were off the charts this time, underlining more than ever his Sir Twitchy nickname. It's because the 950 SM grips you, like Cernicki's fist clutched the key as I tried to take it from him. He was distracted when I said there was a truck outside unloading free 160mm slicks for his CRF 450R Supermoto racer. His vice-like claw relaxed only for an instant, but the key was mine. Guessing by its name, I'm going to go out on a limb and say this bike was inspired by converted dirt bikes like Cernicki's Honda. KTM, of course, based its big twin street machine on an orange version. But as Pierre Terblanche points out in the Hypermotard story elsewhere in this issue, converted motocross bikes with 17-inch wheels don't really make good street bikes. What does make a good street bike is using the ethic behind Supermoto race bikes, much as Buell did in coming up with the new Ulysses. Lightweight, minimal bodywork, grippy tires and an in-command riding position. These qualities should be at the heart of any street bike. Call it a 950 Supermoto if you must, KTM, but ditch the high fender and mount a normal one. Reshape the fuel tank to look less like MX radiator shrouds, and this orange bike starts to look a lot like a sport standard. Especially because at 428 pounds dry, it ain't no Supermoto racer. Light for a current-day open-class streeter, yes, but not something you should be hucking into the air over jumps unless you are very highly trained. So what we have here is a dedicated street bike that draws its inspiration and key design features from the company's dirt bike experience. You get, therefore, about 8 inches of travel front and rear from the WP suspension. The factory tested the suspension on European Supermoto courses, said Tom Moon, media relations manager for KTM. The tracks there are a lot more high-speed and flowing, as well as having more pavement than ones in the US. Stamping is definitely definitive, in the sense that settings are sporty, but without being harsh. And adjustability is wide. Cernicki is not subtle about asking a motorcycle to do things, and he had tightened up front and rear to suit his swift kick, take no prisoners style. Kate, meanwhile, likes to slide as much as anybody but also appreciates a nice, comfy ride on a street bike, which he got on his test loop by backing out the rebound a few clicks. Compression damping at the rear even provides for high and low speed adjustments. You can definitely suit your style here. Chassis feel is awesome, with the bike channeling the spirit of traction right through your palms and ass. I know it sounds uncomfortable, but it's not, and it's way better than aluminum foil under your shoe. Trust me. Never mind edge of traction and the sheer nimbleness of this bike is fantastic, and even a little bit hard to explain. I mean, it isn't hard to explain that it is nimble, but why it is so belies the major design features. The geometry of the chrome moly steel tube frame is, for example, actually fairly conservative for these aggressive times. Rake is 25.4 degrees, trail 4.3 inches. The wheelbase spans 59.5 inches, which is long, but about 2.2 inches shorter than the dual sport adventures. The fork is not leading axle but rather places the axle in line with the legs, and the swing arm is 0.8 inch shorter. At the same time, the only twitch we could find in the chassis was when we put Cernicki aboard. Otherwise, the 950 Supermoto was rock solid. I was really impressed with how stable the bike was on the freeway, said Kate. A lot of naked bikes have that wide jar wiggle, where it almost feels like the wind makes you put unwanted input into the handlebars. Further, cruising along at 80 miles per hour neither overtaxes the engine nor the rider's arms. For the latter, thank the front number plate, which is big enough and high enough to meaningfully deflect wind blasts. This is a comfortable street bike, provided you are tall enough. Anyway, seat height is 34.4 inches, which is on the high side. Did I say high side, or just think it? Even the reach to the foot pegs is quite drew me. Taller riders found the bike very comfortable, and Kate, at 5'10", found it to fit his inseam perfectly. Just like the name KTM is pointy and angular, so is the styling of the 950 small. The bike is made up of visual consonants, starts and stops, sharply defined shapes that are all in stark contrast to the fluid motions of the machine on the road, the gliding arcs of smooth, brake slide hackers, of front and rear wheels lifting skyward with confident ease. The front wheel for most riders comes up in the natural course of aggressive takeoffs. For Cernicki, the rear comes up as a natural course of trying not to squish the photographer's head during photo shoots. Legal says to tell you it was closed course. Highly trained riders, blah, blah. We have been a fan of this 75-degree, counterbalanced V-twin since first getting it in the Adventure 950. Although this is precisely the same LC8 engine as in the big Trailer, torque and power are said to be nominally improved by a different airbox and exhaust system. On the dyno, the SM's 100x 60mm bores smoothly spun the drum to the tune of 92 horsepower and 60 foot-pounds of torque, which is actually slightly less than a previous adventure test bike. but our SM only had about 700 miles before dyno testing, and we've seen 10% increases on some bikes after thorough break-in. The torque curve is nonetheless sweet indeed, and it fills the small dip in the mid-range found on the Adventure. The smooth power also aids in connection between what the rider's right wrist is doing to the contact patch. There is no catch, but the engine revs to 9,500, with peak power coming about 1,000 rpm before this. The rev limiter acts by retarding spark, which is a softer, gentler way of controlling maximum engine speed than cutting spark intermittently as on some systems. The 34mm carburetors work well, but fuel injection has us spoiled. Choke is necessary for cold starting on the 950, and it really is best to let the engine warm up a minute before taking off. Otherwise, it is pretty easy to stop. Also, the starter clutch was screeching on us occasionally. Once up to temp, though, the party is on. "This motor is really torquey right off idle," said Kate. "It's odd because it really feels like it has a lot of bottom end, but once you get a chance to open it up and really rev, it is surprising how good the power is up top. On the gas, it just power wheelies in second gear." The SM has the same 6-speed gearbox and ratios as the Adventure, but the off-roader's 42-tooth rear sprocket and 18-inch rear wheel are replaced with a 41-toother and 17-incher. Both use a 17-tooth countershaft sprocket. As befits a bike like this, the brakes are radial everything, and all of the components are made by Brembo. Front discs measure 305mm in diameter, and the stout caliper mounts no doubt contribute to front-end rigidity, along with the large diameter, hollowed front axle. Each of the 4 caliper pistons has its own pad, and braking response from all this fancy hardware is impressive. Almost too impressive. You get used to the sensitivity at the lever, and because the fork damping offers excellent control, there are no dive issues. Still, the effort required for hard braking is light enough to be counterintuitive. Perhaps it is time for a recalibration of our brain's foil protection and all but the lever requires too light a touch. Also, the reach adjustment was about right at the minimum setting, while anything farther was basically useless for even wearers of XXL gloves. At $12,998, the SM is $3,000 more than a Triumph Speed Triple, but essentially in line with the Ducati Multistrada, both potential competitors. The KTM feels as though it would outclass both those bikes in real cut and thrust riding, without giving up too much in terms of